Okay, I'm good to go. Sure.
Hello, good afternoon. Color guard attention. Color guard, forward march. Pledge of allegiance. If you're in Scout uniform, Scout salute. If you're not, place your right hand over your heart. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to a republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. 2. Color guard, post the colors. Color guard dismissed. You may be seated.
Sorry. Oh, what's this? Good evening and welcome to the Georgia Public Service Commissioners Candidate Forum. I'm Christopher King. I will be your moderator this evening, and thank you for joining us in person and online. The Georgia Public Service Commission, the PSC, is a 5-person elected body that sets rates you pay for electricity and gas, approves new energy projects, and shapes Georgia's energy future. Their decisions directly impact your utility bills, the environment, and even who pays for expensive projects like nuclear power plants or data centers. Now, although we are voting for public service commissioners in District 3, which covers the southern coast of Georgia over to central Georgia, and District 3? I meant to say District 2. And District 3, which covers Fulton and DeKalb and Clayton counties. Every voter in Georgia will have the chance to vote for this election. Early voting begins May 27th. Primary election day is June 17th. If there is a runoff, it will be held on July 15th, 2025. Once the candidates from the respective parties are selected, we will vote for a winner on November 4th in the special election where some of you will be voting also in a municipal election. To find out your respective polling location, please check your voting status at mvp.sos.ga.gov. Now, please note that all candidates were invited to attend. I will start by explaining some of the procedures for the forum. Questions have been curated by tonight's partners and me, and candidates, you will have 2 minutes for an opening statement. During the focus questions section, I will ask each of you the same 4 questions and give you 2 minutes to answer. We will then transition to questions from the audience. Candidates, you will have 1 minute to answer questions from the audience. The last time you have an opportunity to speak will be with a 1-minute closing statement. Excuse me. Opening and closing statements will be done in the following order, based on alphabetical order for opening and reverse for closing. Now, to ensure that everyone has equal time to answer the questions, timekeepers will manage the time. The timekeepers are sitting in the first row, and when there is half a minute left on your speaking time, the timekeeper will hold up a card that says 30 seconds, indicating that you have 30 seconds to finish your answer. At 15 seconds, the timekeeper will hold up a card that says 15 seconds. Please wrap up when you see the stop card. If you continue speaking after the stop card is held up, I'll say thank you, and we'll move on to the next speaker. Now, personal references about other candidates are out of order. If personal references ensue, those responsible will not be asked questions or be allowed additional comments. Now, this session is being live streamed via Georgia One's YouTube channel. All registered participants will receive the recorded webinar. Now, instructions to the audience. Please turn off your cell phones and beeping watches now. We request that you treat all candidates fairly. Please remain quiet throughout the forum. No clapping, no cheering or calling out, with the exception that after their closing statements, you may clap for all candidates if you wish, after their closing statements. Now, you are encouraged to submit questions for the candidates on the provided index cards. Please hold up your cards and community attendants will collect your questions. Questions must be addressed to all candidates and must apply to issues or qualifications for the office of Georgia PSC. Raise your hand if you'd like another index card or to have your question collected. A community attendant will review the questions for legibility, clarity, and applicability to all candidates. I will read as many questions as time allows, sometimes combining similar questions, striving to cover a variety of topics. Please keep your answers short and to the point. Your questions should be shorter than the time allowed for candidates to respond, and it should end with a question mark. Now, we will begin with the candidates for District 2 in alphabetical order, following with District 3 in alphabetical order. Each have 2 minutes to introduce yourself and provide your opening statement. Questions asked are nonpartisan and equitable. All candidates will be given the opportunity to answer the same question before moving on to the next question. Now, let's introduce the candidates. Starting with, is Dr. Alicia Johnson here? No? Okay. Daniel Blackman.
Good evening. So you said 2 minutes, correct?
Yes.
First of all, I want to thank everyone for coming out. I want to thank the candidates that are here, that are on stage. I think it's important for the democratic process, especially with a race such as Public Service Commission, which is not during the presidential year, it's not during the midterm election. It's absolutely critical that people like you that come out for this race understand the importance of the utility regulatory process. So again, my name is Daniel Blackman. I'm a former Democratic nominee for the Public Service Commission. Prior to falling short in the former race in 2021, I became a presidential nominee. I was appointed by President Joseph Biden to run the Environmental Protection Agency in Region 4 and ultimately built and led the first ever STEM division that actually transmitted each of the executive orders with a STEM tag. So workforce development, lowering utility rates, and also focusing on strengthening our grid are very important and critical. And thank you for this evening.
Peter Hubbard.
Hi, good evening, everyone. I'm Peter Hubbard, and so my day job is a solar and storage developer, and I do that in around the country in places like Texas, Louisiana, Michigan, and Illinois. And I've done a lot of advanced development to bring projects like that forward. My background is in basically I've been an energy expert for the last 15 years, working with electric utilities to prepare integrated resource plans, the very thing that I will be down in front of the Public Service Commission testifying about tomorrow morning, tomorrow at some point during the day. And also, maybe the most important thing you should know about me is that for the last 6 years, I've been active in front of the Public Service Commission with a nonprofit called the Georgia Center for Energy Solutions, fighting the good fight for clean energy, for less fossil fuel. I'm encouraging you to go to the website. It's georgia-ces.org. That's where I do a lot of work. And so I'm in this race to bring to the front some of those clean energy plans that I've put.
Okay, they're holding up the sign that reads stop. We're going to have to do a hard stop there. And Fitz Johnson. Is Fitz Johnson here? No. Okay. Robert Jones.
Good evening, I'm Robert Jones. My lovely wife and I moved here 9 years ago from Seattle, where I worked at Microsoft, moving around the world, moving customers into the data center. Prior to that, I worked for the telephone company. I was a senior vice president for network engineering So we have to make sure that our commissioners are independent, they don't get too cozy, they aren't taking campaign contributions from monopoly interests, so that we actually represent the public. Thank you.
Lee Munns.
Thank you. This home. Good evening. My name is Lee Munns. I'm 63 years old. I live in a little town called Harlem, Georgia. I want to let you know a little bit about myself because we're going to talk about the policy issues later. I have 5 children. I have 10 grandchildren. I've been in business for myself since I was 27 years old. I got married when I was 18. I was a father at 19. I had my 3 biological children by the time I was 23. I went in business when my first daughter was 8 years old. Currently now she is the chief of staff for the COO of American Airlines. And all my kids are just doing very well. They're never going to live on my couch, but my retirement plan is looking very good.
Keisha Waits.
Thank you so much. To the hosts and organizers tonight, thank you for this opportunity. My name is Keisha Waits. I'm a Georgia native, a peach. I come to you not as a energy expert by any means, but I do come to you as someone with a long history of advocating for Georgia families. I had the privilege of serving 3 terms in the Georgia House of Representatives, serving on committees such as public safety, juvenile justice, as well as transportation throughout the state of Georgia. Thereafter, I served briefly on the Atlanta City Council, where we took on a number of issues and challenges that affect those in the local communities throughout the city. Looking forward to the conversation. I do believe that representation matters. Deregulation did not serve every Georgian. And like you, I have been puzzled as to why I've seen a 43% increase in my bills. And I certainly look forward to being a part of the conversation and finding solutions to help Georgians who need us the most. Thank you.
And I believe we're going to pause for a moment, if I'm not mistaken. Okay, we're going to pause for a moment. Okay, and Tim Eccles cannot be here tonight, so I'm going to read his bio since he cannot be here. Tim Eccles grew up in Clayton County. The Eccles owned a car auction, dairy farm, and house moving business. In 1978, Tim attended UGA and met Wendy Davis, who he married shortly after graduating. After college, Tim worked for his mentor, Harmon Bourne, at Beaudry Ford in downtown Atlanta. Tim and Wendy taught at Morningside Elementary for Atlanta Public Schools. Tim eventually launched his own organization, Teen Pact, which has grown to be a national citizenship experience for teens operating in all 50 states. It's headquartered in Richmond, Virginia, and Tim serves on the board of the organization. Teen Pact has trained over 82,000 teens and children since its inception in 1994. Tim's most recent book is Jean Marc of Jekyll, a historical fiction book about the founding of the Jekyll Island Club and the story of the remarkable friendship between a French immigrant and a Gullah Geechee descendant. Wendy and Tim have 7 children and have been married for 40 years and live in Houston, outside Athens. Tim has a BA and 2 master's degrees from University of Georgia. And now that we have done that, now that we've introduced who's running, we will move on to the moderator question and the question portion of our forum, which you have 2 minutes to answer each question. And we will begin with, let's see, Tim Eccles is not here. What is happening here? Sorry about that echo there. Tim Eccles is not here. Dr. Alicia Johnson is not here. So let's begin with Lee Munns. And that first question is, how will you ensure transparency in PSC proceedings to allow for meaningful participation, especially among rural and burdened communities?
How would I do transparency? Transparency is something that you live. Transparency is something that you do every day, and that's when you take the time to sit down with people and find out about where they're at. What is their life like? What do they have to deal with every day? What are the struggles that they're facing? Just like the other day, I sat down with a lady and she told me about her power bill going up. So the thing is, ultimately, you do everything out in the open. do everything out in the open. You don't do anything behind the scenes. I've served.
You want to swap microphones there so we can hear you?
Maybe we can get the technical difficulties out of the way at the very beginning. But, you know, and when I served on the school board, when I served on the Professional Standards Commission, one of the things I did when I served on the school board, I was a school board member that would go meet with anybody. And what I would do is try to educate people about where they were at, what their issue was, listen to them, and then we would chart a course of how to move forward. You know, the thing is, every last one of us won't be able to flip the light switch. But there's a lot that goes on behind that light switch. And I want to make sure that when you're paying your bill, you know why you're paying that bill. You know what all is going into that bill. You know what all services are being provided. And you know the cost of those services. And you know that the services that are being provided at the lowest cost available.
And Daniel Blackman, same question, and I'll repeat the question for you, if I can find it. How will you ensure transparency in PSC proceedings to allow for meaningful participation, especially among rural and energy-burdened communities?
The first thing I would do is not take money from the utilities in which we regulate. I think it's important to understand that transparency only matters when it starts with the integrity of the commissioners that are serving, and each of the public service commissioners in the state of Georgia, including the 2 incumbents that are on the ballot this year, collectively taken over $500,000 from the utilities in which they regulate. I think that is a problem. I think ultimately transparency, especially when you look at rural areas, can only begin by bringing the integrity of the Public Service Commission outside of 244 Washington Street, where it's located, into rural communities. I've been around the state as a former regional administrator. I've been in probably 70 or 80 of the 159 counties in Georgia. Rural Georgia and coastal Georgia too often have been left out of the equation. So when you talk about transparency, it has to start, number one, with education. Right? Most people, if you say put PSC, they don't know what a public service commissioner is or does. So we have to start really working on making sure there's a clear distinction that this is a utility commissioner seat. Then people have to understand that when you make decisions and how you make decisions, they're not compromised. And again, I think that it is tremendously disheartening to know that each of the current 5 public service commissioners have all openly taken money from the organizations in which they regulate. When we start focusing on rural Georgia, especially those that may not have Georgia Power directly, transparency will definitely play a critical role, because those individuals and communities that may have UMCs, some areas like Dougherty County where I visited in Albany, Georgia, their rent is as high as their utility bill. That is an absolute problem, and people need to be able to see transparency by public service commissioners, especially my hope, once elected, is to start holding town hall meetings and also host briefing meetings so that when the IRP plan happens and plans are made, we can then transition into communicating with people so they understand why or why not their rates are going up.
Thank you. Lee Munns, do you need me to repeat the question? I'm sorry. I already asked you. I'm sorry, Lee. Daniel Blackman, I apologize. No, I'm not. my apologies. My apologies, folks. Peter Hubbard.
Yeah, it's a great question. So about transparency. So the PSC proceedings are really done in secrecy. Yes, they have public hearings. I'll be down there tomorrow. But largely those, those expert witnesses, the words fall on deaf ears. Even when people come and speak before, to give public comment. I mean, there were over 1,000 comments that were given that were the Columbus Ledger Inquirer looked at. And Timothy Nichols actually said, I just don't listen to those public comments. That's kind of the lack of transparency is where we are now. And so, we saw a secret stipulation that was just released last Monday. And we'll talk about that, I think, a little bit more. I'd like to talk about that. But, there's just a lack of transparency. So what I've tried to do in the work before the Public Service Commission is really just publish my work, show the results, the analysis, not hide from the assumptions as Georgia Power does. It really deals in trade secrecy, it redacts everything overly, so it's very difficult to sort of judge one plan from the next. So, there's just a lack of transparency. It's been fundamental to how this Republican Commission has operated, and I intend to crack that wide open. Sunshine is not only good for making clean, reliable energy, but it's also good as a disinfectant.
Thank you. Robert Jones.
have to go down to Washington Street to give you 3 minutes. There's nothing that prevents us from saying, in fact, I'm sitting in Augusta, I'm in Athens, I'm in Savannah, I want my 3 minutes from a video standpoint to increase participation there. Very reasonable, practical ways to get engaged in the process there. The other is the commission meetings are all recorded on YouTube. 3 years ago, I went to the commission and said, why don't you take your YouTube and do the edited transcript and put it on the website. So basically, we don't have to watch the video for 3 hours. We can actually scan through it and determine what we want to look at. They thought it was a brilliant idea. Someday it'll get implemented. Okay, so there's a lot of practical things we can do to actually increase participation, especially the tools that are out there from the website in terms of the information, and making sure we give people remote access into these proceedings as well.
Keisha waits. Do you need me to repeat the question?
No, Mr. King. Generally, when they get to me, all of the answers have been given. But nonetheless, and I certainly appreciate the knowledge and information that's been shared. The toughest thing, I think, is that, Mr. Blackman hit the nail on the head, many people have no idea that the organization and our agency even exists. And that's not by accident. The gerrymandering you've seen in terms of the electoral process certainly was not by accident. And at the end of the day, when you start to think about the $296 million that were put out in terms of incentives to get data centers to flock to the state of Georgia, we're picking up the tab on that. The 43% increase that we've seen in our bills. And so certainly I love the idea of traveling throughout the state, attending town hall meetings. Even though we represent District 3, which is right here in Metro Atlanta, I think given that we have a vote for the entire state of Georgia, certainly the folks in Augusta or Blue Ridge and those areas in Athens should be included in that conversation. I love the idea of utilizing social media to engage individuals, meaning that people today receive most of their news and information from those apparatuses. And so, for the most part, at the end of the day, I've said this many times, deregulation does not serve the state of Georgia. And at the end of the day, I believe that it is our job. And I think these conversations are healthy in terms of getting information to people, helping them to be informed, and understand that the PSC is in place to work for you as an advocacy agency for consumers.
Thank you very much. We'll move on to the second question, but I want to remind everybody that all the candidates were invited to attend in person, but some either cannot be here or have chosen not to be here. We'll move on to the second question.
Real quick, we're going to switch out microphones. You want to switch out real quick?
Okay. We're going to switch out microphones. For the candidates. We apologize. We're having some technical difficulties with that microphone, so we're just going to swap that out so that all candidates can be heard fairly, so you can make informed decisions. You want to take this microphone? Why don't you go ahead and do this? I have this other microphone right here. It'll serve me just fine. You don't need to hear me twice.
Oh, that's why it had echo.
Oh, there you go. Okay. That's probably what it was. Okay. Now that we have that out of the way, okay, now we can really get underway here. Okay. All right, the second question, what steps will you take to protect everyday ratepayers from paying the cost of new projects like data centers or nuclear reactors? And we will begin again with Lemons. Is that who we?
Can we change up? She really wants.
Okay. Then we'll begin. Then we'll go in reverse order. Then we will begin with Keisha Waits.
Thank you, Mr. King. So with the number of data centers that are coming to the state of Georgia, we will need to have more energy and more access. And so it's my understanding there is a initiative to create these little mini nuclear plants surrounding these facilities. Well, we've already known that Plan Vogel was passed on to you and I. And so what I'd like to see is, instead of giving out those $296 million in incentives and the fact that they pay 40% less than the national average, I'd like to see some of those dollars stay in our pockets as consumers. So I believe we do that through stipulated agreements. I believe we do that at the time that companies decide to come here to the state of Georgia and do business. We do that through community benefit agreements and ensuring that taxpayers and ratepayers are not left on the hook for the infrastructural improvements, for the additional usage in terms of power and water that come with these facilities. Thank you.
And we'll move on to Robert Jones. Should I repeat the question for you?
No, I understand it.
Okay.
It's actually one of the core issues of why I got involved in the campaign. Frankly, I was disappointed to see that the commission had approved confiscation of your funds to basically do financial backstop and investment for $4 billion to the tune of construction for Vogtle. Quite frankly, they're an investor-owned monopoly utility. They should be able to stand on their own in terms of their investment creditworthiness without coming to our pocket to basically backstop their funding there. So I'm very firm on that position. However, when you saw the announcement last week about a freeze of rate increases for 3 years, when you read through that and what you see, Georgia Power is requesting of the commission pre-approval for pre-construction costs for the next wave of data center electrification. Totally against what we're saying in terms of trying to protect consumers from having to go ahead and fund these data centers. So, the data centers aren't here yet. They want to collect money for pre-construction. They're looking at us one more time. And so we need a change in the commission to make sure they stop the confiscation of our funds to basically go backstop the investor-owned utility, because they're a monopoly, they've got the resources, they've got Southern Company, but this approach is the wrong way that the commission's on, and they went ahead and approved that stipulation agreement with no public input.
Thank you. I'm going to repeat the question again for the sake of the viewers and the people in the audience. What steps will you take to protect everyday ratepayers from paying the cost of new projects like data centers or nuclear reactors? And we go now to, would that be Peter Hubbard?
Yeah, so it's a great question. What can we do? What steps will I take to protect the ratepayer from things like data centers and nuclear power plants? So, you know, the Public Service Commission, they are constitutional officers of the state, and they have significant regulatory authority. And what they can do are things like propose a tariff for a certain class of customer. They have significant authority to put forward alternative plans, the stipulation agreement that we'll talk about, I think, in a little bit. They can make amendments. There's a lot that they can do, but they simply are not doing it right now, and that's why your power bills have gone up $60 per month in the summer in the last 2 years. So specifically, Vogtle, unfortunately 3 and 4, those units are baked into the cake. We paid for 15 years of construction work in progress, and we'll pay for 60 years of amortization. But we can stop, and it was predicated on a false load growth assumption. That's happening right now with the data centers. That's why I'm active in front of the PSC to push back on this idea that we must build fossil plants to meet this massive data center load growth. The other thing is, you know, those data centers are being offered a sweetheart deal of 5 cents a kilowatt hour, while you all, me, residential customers, we pay 21 cents a kilowatt hour. That's why they're coming to Georgia, is because we give them sweetheart deals and tax abatements and other things like that. That's costing you. That's why we have to fight at the PSC. We need people that will stand up for ratepayers, and that's what I intend to do.
Thank you. Daniel Hubbard.
I think you just made us
I'm sorry,
You made us a hybrid
Daniel
candidate.
Blackman, forgive me.
Oh man, that's
My old eyes.
No, man,
they mix up things here.
That's fun. Look, first and foremost, I think there's going to be a consistency in a lot of these answers, and you know, what I will say is audits have to be done. You know, we need to look at the pre-construction benefits that are given. We saw this with Plant Vogtle; it's been mentioned twice. Nuclear Plant Vogtle was 7.5 years behind schedule, over $15 billion over budget, and that was, as Mr. Hubbard mentioned, was baked into the cost over time. The frustration I have is, you know, specific to the question of what we can do for individuals, is we have to make sure that in making these steps across the board with audits and other areas, we're actually looking at what has worked around the country. When I served on the federal level as a regional administrator, I was actually responsible for the cryptocurrency and data mining that was happening in Kentucky. So some of the things that we were able to do was we were able to look over time at that direct impact and then look at the models that different companies offered that were able to help release the burden on many of these customers. Now in Georgia, unfortunately, we tend to give upfront costs on secret deals and different kind of negotiations that never make it to consumer benefits. It never goes to ratepayer benefits. And the problem that I have overall with how these things are stated is when we look at how we can support customers, I'm going to be honest with you, until we get a candidate, and I mean, you've got some good choices, until we get a candidate that can advocate for that and bring up these issues during the hearing process. We can't wait until ratepayers are stuck. If you're a senior citizen on a fixed income, it's too late once these rates are baked in for you to be able to get that relief. So 2 things that I think are important is, number 1, let's look at an audit on where we are and what has happened. And number 2, let's look at metrics. We need to look at performance-based metrics over time, because when these data centers come up, I'm going to share this with you because it's really important. In many areas around the United States, these data centers have come up. When they're gone, we're still on the hook to pay them. So we need to make sure that we're communicating with the legislative body and local county commissioners to ensure that these practices are in place to protect our most vulnerable communities.
And now, let's go to Lee Munns.
Thank
Shall I
you for
repeat the
giving
question
me.
for you, or are you good?
I'm good. Talking about the data centers, I live in the Augusta area. I was there when Plant Vogel was being built. I knew all the people that were involved in it. Yeah, there were a lot of people that made a lot of good money, but anytime you have money that's going out like that, sooner or later somebody's going to have to pay for it. And everybody in this room is going to have to pay for it over long term. If these data centers are going to come, I'm a business owner. Nobody gave me any money to go out there and build my building and do my investment. These companies, they have plenty of money if they want, and I'm a Republican sitting here talking about this, but if you want to come in here and you want to build something, you build it. You look at the cost effectiveness of it, and you go out there and build it. You don't need to build it on the backs of hardworking people. Every time somebody gets a tax break, unless government slows down their spending, somebody else is going to pick up that bill. And I don't want it to be the ratepayers of Georgia picking up that bill. We also have water issues coming with the data centers. Where I live at, they just rezoned 1,900 acres. They're going to build 8 million square feet of data centers. They're not going to hire a lot of people. They're only going to work a limited number of people. So the thing is, you're not going to be affecting the economy by having a lot of people working there. The current commissioners that sit there now, as one of the other gentlemen said, when somebody comes there and says something, they just listen to it, but they don't do anything about it. You got to have somebody that's going to ask the tough questions. You got to have somebody that's going to say, no, not on my watch. We're going to change things, and we're going to move forward, and it's going to be better for the people at the bottom, not the people at the top.
Thank you. We're going to move on to the next question. What steps will you take to protect everyday ratepayers from paying the cost of new projects like data centers or nuclear reactors? We just asked that one. Do you support expanding renewable energy like solar and wind? And how would you push for that along with decreased reliance on fossil fuels at the PSC? And we will begin with Lee Munns.
One of the things, as I was just talking about, the 8 million square feet, if we want to allow these data centers to come in here, one of the complements they can do is have rooftop solar. Another thing we've got is all of these facilities, tilt-up construction. I work in construction. These 300,000 square foot, 500,000 square foot buildings, the reason they don't have rooftop solar is because we're not putting the demands on them and saying, hey, you need to build that building so that it has a load capacity that we can put rooftop solar on it. But the other thing is, if we look at any generation that we're going to bring online, as I was talking to Peter earlier, we have to look, can the distribution system handle it? So that there's multi-facets that we have to look at as we move forward and bringing more capacity on, whether it's solar. And one thing I will tell you, the topography in Georgia is not for wind. And I don't want anybody going off the coast of Georgia messing with my Georgia shrimp, building some big wind out there. But I am for rooftop solar, and what we've got to do is mandate it to the people that are building these large capacity buildings to be able to put rooftop solar there.
Thank you. And let's now go on to Daniel Blackman.
So during my federal service, this is actually what I did. You know, we had, under the previous administration, a $27 billion investment called the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund that fell under the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, which was a $1.2 trillion investment. The critical thing that we need to know about this is we already have the capacity in Georgia to invest in these areas. It's just that no one is driving the conversation nor encouraging public and private partnerships. To Mr. Munns' point, rooftop solar, community solar, these are all areas that we have not explored in Georgia or placed a heavy investment on. And when you look at rural parts of Georgia where these communities are overwhelmingly impacted, we can't afford to not have a plan to go forward in those areas. That's why this integrated resource plan discussion that is happening right now is critical, because we're not talking about how fossil fuel industry has overwhelmingly collapsed and destroyed rural communities in this state. If you go to Macon, Georgia, right outside of Macon and Juliet, Georgia, these communities have been impacted by the fossil fuel industry to the point that we're seeing cancer rates increase. We're seeing respiratory illnesses increase. We're seeing waterways that are contaminated in an irreparable way. And we have an administration out of Washington that's rolling back every environmental protection and every single dollar, because it's so-called under DEI or environmental justice, justice that actually helps rural communities. And when you don't have the investment infrastructure, yet we have a governor that touts this is the best place to do business, I have a problem with that. Because if we're the best place to do business, that includes strengthening areas like Dalton, Georgia, where Q-Cells is. It includes making sure that communities in rural Georgia have access to solar. And it also includes, and I'll probably be a little in opposition to my friend Mr. Munns, but at the same time, I think we should have investment to explore all forms of alternative energy. If wind doesn't work, it doesn't work, but we can't continue to rely on just expanding nuclear and having fossil fuels without having a consideration of investments into renewable energy.
Thank you. I'll repeat the question for the audience. Do you support expanding renewable energy like solar and wind, and how would you push for that, along with decreased reliance on fossil fuels at the PSC? And we will move on to Peter Hubbard.
This is a great question for me. This is my bread and butter. I am an energy nerd. I live and eat and breathe this. I dream about this. And so I have a lot of ideas. And so we mentioned rooftop solar. Absolutely. We've got a lot of rooftop space. A lot of people invest their dollars in that. Problem is, remember I said 21 cents is what you pay for your power. You only get 7 or 8 cents back from Georgia Power Company. That's just not a fair shake. So that's why you don't see more. That's why we only have 5,000, 6,000 households with rooftop solar versus Florida or North Carolina with 70, 80,000. We can do a lot of other things. I was mentioning earlier to a gentleman, virtual power plants. Take those rooftop solar and battery storage installations, aggregate them, 1,000 of them with software, and you can avoid building one of those fossil gas plants. That's a huge savings. That's a benefit to all of us. There's a lot of community solar opportunities. You can put 9 acres here, 2 acres there, that sort of thing, and avoid rooftop solar without taking up prime farmland. We could do wind. It's not a great resource. We'd probably have to buy it from like Oklahoma and bring it over here, but we could do that. And one of the things that I would like to do is just more battery storage. We don't have to necessarily build new transmission lines. We can use what we already have better by just putting small battery installations next to substations, and you can crank out a lot more solar from your grid. So there's just a plethora of opportunities to advance solar and storage and wind and drive down fossil. To the extent that we put more of those renewables on the grid, we drive out the fossil. So that's the plan. I'd love for you to go to the website and look at more, and I'll talk about it more before the Public Service Commission about how we can do it better without fossil.
Thank you. Keisha Waits.
Thank you so much. I want to start by stating that I am not anti-tech nor am I anti-business. I think that's important. I think we have to find a fine balance as it relates to the question. But I think one of the things that we can also do for those companies and corporations that are coming here, I think we can also mandate through these stipulated agreements that they use a certain percentage of wind and solar and build that into the agreement when they make the decision to relocate to Georgia. Georgia Power currently has a buyback program as it relates to solar. Many of us don't know about it because it's not incentivized or no one talks about it. Secondly, it's very, very expensive. So I think that in that $296 million that I spoke about in terms of incentives, I think we could put some of those funds into libraries, hospitals. As we start to talk about new construction, those are areas that we can use, put solar on there, and it could be a partnership between government as well as communities so that that cost is not passed on to consumers. Thank you.
And we will move on to our next question. I'm sorry? Oh, I'm so sorry. I did not, but forgive me for being rude. I'm jumping the gun. I apologize. And we move on to Robert Jones. Sorry, I skipped over you before. Can you find it in your heart to forgive me?
And I agree we should be using renewables and not burning fossil fuel. However, we're at a really critical time that all of us should watch really closely right now with the integrated resource plan going on. Georgia Power is asking for about 9,500 megawatts of new energy over the next 5 years. Most of it's going to come from fossil fuel burning of natural gas and wanting to leave the coal-fired plants open. In this proceeding, there is a group called the Clean Energy Buyers Association. This is a set of investors that want to come in and do their own electricity generation using clean energy and sell it into the data centers. They thought they had an agreement with Georgia Power. They think they can basically bring in maybe 6,000 of the 9,000 megawatts using renewable energy. That is sitting before the commission right now. The Commission's got to make a decision on that between now and July 15th, so watch it very closely in terms of what their commitment is in terms of renewables and clean energy for the state of Georgia. If they defer to Georgia Power, then we're on basically a natural gas trajectory for the next 5 years that's going to disincent those that are basically wanting to come in here and invest with clean energy.
Thank you. And we'll move on to the next question. And the next question is, Georgia Power last week reached a tentative deal with the Public Service Commission to keep customers' rates steady. But there are exceptions. The utility could still ask for rate hikes to cover costs from damage from storms like Hurricane Helene. Doesn't this create a loophole for Georgia Power to raise rates? Will you do anything to close that loophole? And let's start with Keisha Waits. Go in that order.
Thank you so much. I spent many, many years traveling the country working for FEMA, and so I've seen the horrific damage that natural disasters can bring. I also understand the need to balance those needs. Right now, when you look at Puerto Rico and other areas who've had challenges with infrastructure and maintaining their grid, those are important conversations. But I also think it's important, too, that we make sure that when we talk about taxpayer dollars and we were making decisions for consumers, that we're looking at our seniors and those who are most vulnerable. And so for that reason, I support a tiered system to ensure that those who have challenges meeting those expenses in terms of rates going up, that we can make sure that they're protected and that they are, make sure that they're not burdened with energy costs that we're receiving in the state of Georgia. Thank you.
And let's now go to Robert Jones.
So the announcement last week, I put into the category of a political stunt. It made for great headlines. We're going to freeze residential rates for 3 years. I went through and read all the information, okay? First of all, the piece around storm recovery, it's about $870 million, over 2.7 million Georgia Power customers. That works out to about $304 per customer. You do that over 24 months, it's about $15 a month more. So yes, your rate has gone down, but when I worked at the commission, we had this philosophical debate all the time. People aren't rate sensitive, they're bill sensitive. They're looking at their bill this month compared to last month, this time of year compared to the last time of year, and your bill's gonna go up. So it was a nice political stunt, but when you read beneath it, it really is a lot of fungible cost accounting to the benefit of Georgia Power to ensure that they continue to make their earnings. So they've adjusted their depreciation schedule. They've adjusted their tax credits, their investment credits. The amount of flexibility Georgia Power was granted with that little stunt, basically the commission walked away from their job. Their job is to go in and scrutinize the cost of a utility, especially a monopoly utility, with a fine-tooth comb. And they said, we're not going to do it now for another 3 years, and we haven't done it 3 years before that. Who's minding the store? We need a change.
Peter Hubbard.
Well, I really want to pick right up on that with what Mr. Jones was saying. So the stipulation agreement was a bad deal for Georgia, is a bad deal for Georgia. And here's why. It locks in those rate increases over the last 2 years, that's $60, right? We don't get the chance to argue for a decrease now. They promised, Georgia Power Company in the 23 IRP update said, we'll give you $2.89 of savings in the next rate case. Well, that's now canceled. But here's, and I'll tell you why. There's four loopholes in it, but first, I just want to read this. This is important. This is the commission rule, okay? And it says, this is Commission Rule 515-2-1, opinions of commissioners. Every member of the commission will, in all cases, reserve his opinion and in no way commit himself in advance touching the merits of any matter or question to be passed upon by the commission or that should be dealt with it until the facts and evidence are all submitted and the commission considers the same in administrative session. That didn't happen. So the rules are fungible. It's rules for thee, not for me. And that's how the commission operates. That's why the two Republicans are not here right now, because they don't want to face the music. Real quickly, the four loopholes. This is important. So number one is this is only affecting the base rates. That's 60% of your bill, but the other 40% could double, right? And already you're paying $50 a month for the fossil gas. Number two, at any point they can invoke the interim cost recovery mechanism and raise rates. They can just do it. Number three, the company's profits come from an earnings band, return on equity. They actually are able to float that about a point higher, and even, so they're limited to 11.9% as their cap. They've gone up to 13.69%. There's that in this as well, and a $300 million slush fund to be able to increase their return on equities earnings band. And then the fourth one is just simply, they're asking for costs for things they've already expended for fossil gas plants, without having ever asked for any scrutiny or authority or anything like that. So they're incurring costs and asking us for pay for it later. There's just a ton of bad deals in this stipulation agreement, and it has to go.
We'll move on to Daniel Blackman.
So obviously there are a ton of loopholes. I attended the press conference, and it's a sad day in Georgia where they feel that the decisions they make are not in a position to be scrutinized by the general public. And it's been said here, knowing that there's loophole after loophole where they can recoup incentives. They can actually, during this freeze with the base rate, I think what most people don't understand are the tremendous amount of ways that they can still raise costs and raise rates on bills that are that you can see if you get an itemized bill. Excuse me, I was trying to not take exactly what Mr. Hubbard said, because those 4 points that he made are really important. But when you look at your itemized bill and you look at fuel costs, when you look at different things such as storm recovery, when we looked at Plant Vogtle, for example, nuclear cost recovery, these are things that we just, like with the blind eye, we're not looking for. And what I would first encourage any Georgia Power customer to do is get what's called an itemized bill. These two gentlemen have actually said the majority of what needs to be spoken about how Georgia Power and the Public Service Commissioners can turn a blind eye, and by year 3, while we think we're saving money, we're still paying more. And the last time I checked, every summer over the last decade has gotten hotter. Our winters have gotten colder. We are going to use more power. So they're going to recoup their costs. When Georgia Power was on the hook for Plant Vogtle, which you'll hear a lot about tonight, their shareholders did not incur any costs. It was completely put on the ratepayers. And if we don't start thinking about how these decisions are going to be impacting us, and we stop allowing them to hold these press conferences, when is the last time we heard the governor host a press conference for the Public Service Commission in a year where you can not only get 1, but 2 Public Service Commission seats and turn around and get full control of the commission by year 3? These are things that have been done to cause what I would consider shenanigans, to take your eyes away from the data centers, the increases that are embedded in your current rates, and also the fact that people are starting to pay attention. We are, first of all, and I'll say this in closing, these individuals, we've never seen a Public Service Commission.
Your time is up. I'm sorry, your time is up.
Thank you.
And we're going to move on to the next question. How will you protect, I'm sorry, we did not, forgive me, I'm so sorry. I'm jumping the gun again. Lee Munns, please.
Thank you very much, because this is the Republican that gets to jump on the Republicans. I do not appreciate them coming out preemptively saying that they're going to have a rate freeze, because, folks, what's finally happening is people are finding out what the PSC is. They're finding out what the PSC has been doing, and now they're seeing how it's affecting you, and as your bill keeps going up and up and up, it's got to stop. They are regulators first. Yes, they are public service commissioners, but their job is to regulate. There has been no regulation going on whatsoever. Even when Plant Vogtle went over, they immediately should have said, okay, we understand we're going to build this, and there's cost to be recouped, but you're not going to make any profit on it. We're going to cover the cost, and we're going to get it done because we're so far into it. Because I'm in the construction, I know they had the 2 plants going on over in Jenkinsville, and they want to talk about, it all went bad when Westinghouse did this and did that. Plant Vogtle started going south within the first 24 months. I work with the people that are in these construction companies. I understand how it operates, and the thing is, I do not appreciate them coming out and trying to take the common person out there who still doesn't fully understand about the PSC and saying, oh, we're going to freeze your rates. And I really think people are looking past that, because people are no longer that dumb. Because you know what? They pay their bill every month. Somebody that pays their bill every month is starting to wise up and realize what's going on. And so I'm glad that all these people are running, that they're bringing this to the forefront. That's why I'm here, and that's what I believe in, is representing people and start doing the job that the job requires. Just as Peter said, nobody should be making any commitments. People should be asking questions, and they should be doing it out there in front of the public where they can see exactly what is going on. My opponent, as he's not here tonight, I'm here.
Your time is up. Thank you very much. Well, here's what we're going to do. We're going to pick up where we left off. So since you were the last one to speak, so you'll be the first one to speak in this round. So
Keisha's going to be happy with that.
Keisha, did we get all the candidates in this one? Did I ask all the candidates? Did all the candidates speak? This last question.
Me going first.
Okay. Whoever. Okay. Well, how will you protect rural and minority landowners from unfair land grabs by big utilities or railroads? Let's start with Lee Munns.
Repeat that one more time.
How will you protect rural and minority landowners from unfair land grabs by big utilities or railroads?
Okay, I know exactly what you're talking about, and that's Hancock County, and that's where my grandmother grew up at. And when I served on the school board, I was faced with one time that the school system had picked a piece of property they wanted to build a school on, and they basically told the people if they didn't sell it, they'd take it through eminent domain. I sat there and I said, oh, no, 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 no. That's those people's property, and if you want it, you're going to have a conversation with them, and you're going to come to a fair price, and ultimately, if they don't want, there's other property that we can move on to. But what I ended up doing, even though I was an independent person on a school board, I went and sat down with this family, and I started to explain the process to them and everything else, and ultimately, they told me, Mr. Munns, we don't have a problem with the school system purchasing the piece of property. We just want to be treated fairly, we want a fair price for it, and we will be excited in the years to come that we can say, hey, look at where that school's located at. That used to be Grandpa's property and all that kind of good stuff. But you don't go out there and just take something, especially when it's for a private entity, to go in there and build a railroad for a private business. That is not public domain. That is an independent business going in there and doing stuff. But I think the other thing is, and it's just like we talked about transparency. Don't do the strong arm. Go sit down and talk with people. Find out where they're at, find out their concerns, and a lot of times you can realize there's a place to come to a workable agreement. But just to go in there and do that, I don't agree with that whatsoever.
Thank you. We'll go now to Daniel Blackman.
This story is one that most people try to wrap their heads around, because when you think of the Public Service Commission, for those of us that know, they regulate our gas, our electric, and our telecommunications, and as it relates to EMCs, they look at the financing of projects. In the early 1900s, the black families in this country owned upwards of 18 million acres of land. By 1997, that number had dropped below 3 million. This family in Hancock County is a further description of it, but the folks in Sandersville and Hancock are not standing for it. Not only this black family, but the white families around that area recognize that the Public Service Commission is not only in the wrong in this area, and I'm going to tell you why. The railroad company that is utilizing this eminent domain process is a privately owned company. This is not something under the purview or in a legal aspect that the Public Service Commission should be getting involved in. When you look at what's happening to this family in this area, the Public Service Commission, it is true, in the 1800s was a railroad commission, but as it evolved and it grew, we haven't seen this type of situation happen in far too long. And when you look at rural areas are too often the case study for what these legislative bodies and these regulatory organizations can do to compromise the integrity of these landowners. I think it is sickening. I think any landowner in the United States, no matter where they are, what county, that owns their land, unless it is for the specific purposes under the law and the Constitution as it relates to eminent domain, should never have to lose their land, especially in this case when this family has had that land for over 150 years. It's very, very troublesome, and I hope that you wouldn't be surprised to know that both of the candidates in this race that are incumbents have taken money from the railroad owner in Sandersville.
Thank you. Peter Hubbard.
Yeah, this is a great question as well, and I completely agree with everything that was said about the railroad issue in Hancock County. There's also, just today at the Public Service Commission, there was a woman who spoke about a new transmission line that would be serving a substation built for a data center. It's right up near Plant McDonough in sort of northwest Atlanta. And so, you know, we have to be sympathetic to, property rights. And eminent domain, we have to use it very judiciously if we have to use it at all. I think by doing smaller scale, tucking in, solar in the little corners, we don't necessarily need to take away any, build new transmission, that sort of thing. There is a lot more solar resources in the south of the state, and so, connecting the resources in the south to the load center here in Atlanta, you need to build transmission, but in my work, I also speak a lot with people that own land when I'm going out and trying to gin up a new project. And you, as a landman, you have to treat people fairly and talk with them on their level, and just make sure that you're valuing the land. They put their life and time and energy into it. It means a lot to them. Oftentimes, it can help pay for their kid to go through college through some of these options and lease agreements we put together. So there's benefits. I don't want to stand in the way of those benefits, but it has to be fair. There has to be fair market value. And if there's a better way to do it by avoiding eminent domain, then do that. And I'm always looking for those solutions.
Thank you. Robert Jones.
Complete agreement with the previous candidates. I could never envision myself as a commissioner exercising eminent domain for private use. Eminent domain is really a bad situation. There are times for public use in terms of the social benefits. You have to go down that path, but never should you do eminent domain to benefit a private business.
Keisha Waits.
Thank you so much. So historically in Georgia, we've seen this with the creation of I-75. For many, many decades, this tactic has been utilized, often impacting brown and black communities, unfortunately. A more recent example is Mercedes-Benz. This conversation came up as well in terms of the use of eminent domain. To Mr. Mons' point, the issue is fair market value to ensure that if there is a need for eminent domain, to ensure that these landowners are given a fair market value and that there's a benefit to the community as well. And lastly, I think that we need to think more about how we can benefit the community when we start to make these decisions. And I want to go back to that $296 million in terms of incentives. How do we ensure that those communities who are impacted most by eminent domain, that the community as a whole, including the landowners, reap a benefit as well? And I think we do that through those stipulated agreement and those cost benefit agreements.
Thank you. Now, have we gotten all the candidates for this last round of questions here? I think we've gotten through everybody. Okay, we're now going to begin with the next segment of the forum. That is the audience Q&A. This audience Q&A is a chance for everyone to get involved. Questions have been vetted. You have 1 minute to answer the questions presented. And while we know your response time is tight, please target your response as much as possible to get as many audience questions answered. And answers will be given in the following order. What do you want to do? Okay. So we're going to go to this question? Okay. Okay. So we're going to go to this question. How will the judge's recommendation that Daniel Blackman isn't eligible to run impact the campaign? And we'll start with Daniel Blackman.
So for those that don't know, recently an administrative ruling was held that affects my personal campaign for the Public Service Commission that was brought up as a residency and qualifications issue. While my family and I did relocate into the city, the qualification that was brought up was in direct correlation to the current address that I have. It is an administrative hearing, an administrative judge. That judge must pass along his findings to the Secretary of State. Once the Secretary of State makes a decision, which we have all the evidence and everything that is needed to prove the qualification, the Secretary of State will make a decision, and at that time, we have the option from a legal standpoint to appeal. I have no doubt in my mind that the evidence that we have and the decisions that we made in October of last year will not affect the long-term viability of the candidacy, but if it does, we're very well prepared to address it.
And let's go now to Peter Hubbard.
Look, I think all of us would make good candidates, quite honestly. I don't really want to comment on this so much. I'll just say that I've lived in Edgewood for the last 10 years. There won't be any issues there. I really think we should reserve our firepower, honestly, for the Republicans that have done us poorly over the year. And I just want to make sure that we have the chance to actually go through all the way through the November election and not have anything sort of tarnish it or hold us back. We can't afford to lose this race.
Robert Jones.
I have no comment.
Keisha Waits. Lee Munns.
I live in Harlem, Georgia. Been living there for a long time. If you want good ice cream, go to Main Street Sweets. Main Street Sweets. Kind of hard to get off the tongue.
Keep this related to the question at hand here.
Well, y'all were talking about residency, and I just confirmed my residency. I didn't miss the question.
Okay. Thank you very much. The next audience question, have we covered all the candidates in this round here? Okay. The next audience.
I will say one thing.
I think I'm sorry.
As y'all see, I'm very candid.
Sir, we're going to move on, okay? But this is not fair to the other candidates. All right. Thank you very much. Now, your thoughts on moving Georgia Power to pay for performance instead of protect based on building new plants. Why should those whose power is not provided by Georgia Power be interested in this election? Did we get that question? No. Okay, I'll read this again. Your thoughts on moving Georgia Power to pay for performance instead of profit based on building new plants. What? Okay, all right, that's one question. Okay. And we will end with Lee?
I'm ready to.
We ended with Lee, so we'll start with Lee. Okay. No, we ended with Lee, so we'll start with Lee on this one, please.
I'm not real sure where you're at on the. I really don't fully understand the question.
I'll repeat the question. This isn't my question. This is an audience question. Your thoughts on moving Georgia Power to pay for performance instead of profit based on building new plants.
Okay, so basically what you're talking about is creating a metrics that evaluates how they're delivering, how they're producing, and everything else, and how they're distributing. And that's the way we ought to look at any entity. We ought to look at the success of their operations. We ought to look within the cost of their operations. Is there a cost-cutting factor that can be put in there? Everybody talks about where we're 11% lower than somebody else, or we're 11% higher than this. My thing is, I want to know that we are running a power company at the lowest cost possible, evaluating every level of their cost structure. Because I'm a business owner. I know every year I have to look at what my overhead cost me last year and what can I do better this year to be more competitive against my customers. Well, since Georgia Power doesn't have to be in a competitive market, it's up to the commissioners to make them be competitive, to make them look at their cost of delivery, to make them look at their cost of generation and make them to look at the future.
We'll move on to Keisha Waits.
Thank you. So Georgia Power provides, I believe, 50% of the power to the state of Georgia. There are other smaller entities that do not use Georgia Power, but most of them do. So a couple of things. We've already talked about the fact that deregulation did not serve the state of Georgia. We've had 6 rate hikes, I think, in 2 years. And so certainly there's a conversation surrounding accountability. In addition to the fact that Plant Vogel had millions of dollars in relation to overrun cost. I don't know of any business or entity that can function and they're not performing. So certainly I support the idea of making it performance-based.
And Robert Jones.
So because Georgia Power is monopoly, the monopoly framework is that once you set your cost, it defines your price. From your price, you tack on your profit. So there is indirectly an incentive in there to keep padding your costs because it drives up your profit. That's not always the case. It's more incentive of how do you appease the regulators to basically get what you want there. So on the federal side, what you've seen from the Federal Department of Energy is actually a move more toward competition into the interstate energy market. I think when you look at the clean energy buyers, which now some of the large manufacturers have some choices on where they want to get their electricity from. I think we're at the beginning edges of probably seeing some more competition in the energy market that moves more toward value-based pricing versus cost-based pricing for electricity. It's probably 5-7 years out, but it feels like we're going in that direction. And if you're a monopolist, you are scared crazy because you've never been in a competitive market before, so you want the commission to protect you. And a lot of what's going on right now is, how do we get this commission to protect our business?
Sir, your time is up. And let's move on now to Peter Hubbard.
Yeah, the question is about the current paradigm, performance-based rate making for Georgia Power Company versus the current paradigm where basically their built assets, they get a percentage of that, the return on equity, which is up to 11.9% or even higher. But the problem with that is that when they have, so the more they build, the more they earn. That's the paradigm right now. And when there's a Vogel 3 and 4 with cost overruns, they actually earn profit on those cost overruns. It's a really bad policy. It can work when you have regulators who do their job and hold the monopoly accountable, but that's not what we have right now. So I'm certainly open to performance-based rate making where you hold the utilities' feet to the fire and you reward them for doing things like energy efficiency. There's a lot of good options. Hawaii Electric Company is a great example of performance-based rate making, and we need that in Georgia.
Daniel Blackman.
I absolutely agree with performance-based metrics. I think performance is absolutely important to the regulatory process. If you look at what happened in Texas in 2021 when their grid failed, that was a tremendous indictment on how their infrastructure wasn't prepared. When Georgia Power does right, they should be rewarded. We do have a monopoly. I want to see our grid continue to be strong, safe, and reliable. That is, and I don't believe anyone up here wants to see them not be able to profit on those areas. However, when they are profiting on projects and structures that are at the detriment of ratepayers being able to have affordable rates and competitive rates, I am totally against that. And that includes our data centers, including our utility companies. If the performance is not there, we need to rethink it. We need to audit these areas, and we need to make sure that if there are no community benefits in place, we make sure those returns go back to the ratepayer.
Thank you. Is that it? We covered all the candidates. Okay. Moving on.
My question was not taken up.
Excuse me, sir. You'll have, excuse me. Thank you. Next question is, why should customers who do not get their power from Georgia Power be interested in this election? And we will start where we ended with Daniel Blackman.
So I've had an EMC, I've had Georgia Power. I think you should all be interested because Georgia's energy future is reliant on the Public Service Commission. Regardless of if you have an EMC, you have a local utility, or you have Georgia Power, the way we generate power in this state is going to affect you in some way, shape, or form. If you're in rural Georgia and you're seeing more of an impact on the fossil fuel industry, I think you need to understand that ultimately the decisions that are made at the Public Service Commission are going to either impact your pocketbook or your personal health. We need to make sure we address those issues because outside of Metro Atlanta, senior citizens are the most overwhelmingly impacted communities in rural Georgia, and I think it's very, very important for us to make sure that we explain that more, and it's going to take a lot more than just one election cycle to inform, educate, and communicate with the public overall.
Peter Hubbard.
It's a great question. So there's 44 electric membership corporations. There's also Oglethorpe Power, MEAG, Municipal Electric Authority of Georgia. There's Dalton Utilities. There's others. But Georgia Power Company is the 900-pound gorilla, and what they do influences everything, kind of like Atlanta. And so what, the reason why it's important is when they make a decision to build a new nuclear power plant or new gas-fired power plants, Georgia Power Company is a wholesaler. They're a generation and transmission wholesaler as well as distribution, but they generate the power, they push it over the wires to those EMCs, and the EMCs buy it from them. The reason why you haven't seen some of the same rate impacts is because they have long-term contracts, so it takes time to filter down, but they will filter down. It's the bad form of trickle down. And that's why it's important for anyone in this state who pays a power bill to be interested in this election.
Robert Jones.
So the commission as it operates today, it's a reaction function. Georgia Power submits something, it reacts to it. An EMC submits something, it reacts to it. And so what we see right now is basically the state went ahead and incentivized all these data centers, which have shown up, and we didn't have an energy plan underneath that. And so we need to be looking at the entire state in terms of what is the energy future of Georgia, both within Georgia Power's area as well as with the EMC areas, and say, what is the plan that we want Georgia from an energy standpoint, from an energy mix standpoint, so it gets delivered there? That's a function the commission should be doing, but it's in a reaction function right now. I want to get elected to be more proactive, more strategic in terms of how we think about our energy future.
And Keisha Waits.
Thank you. So Georgia is number 13 in terms of high energy cost. Metro Atlanta has some of the highest disconnect rates throughout Metro Atlanta and for the state of Georgia. And so the reason why others should care about what's happening as it relates to Georgia Power is because those communities where those data centers are flocking have the greatest need for grid and infrastructural improvements. At the end of the day, those data centers are flocking to those communities. Most of those facilities utilize equivalent of a small town in terms of water consumption and energy consumption. And so for that reason, those areas should care the most about it because they will be the greatest impacted. Thank you.
Lee Munns.
There are 11.8 million Georgians, and every last one of them should be concerned about this election and what's going to happen going forward, because they all want to flip a light switch, they all want to be warm in the winter, and they want to be cool in the summer. As a business owner, every year I have a business plan, and I have to go in and look at that plan and re-up that plan based upon where I'm at and the things that are taking place. Georgia Power is supposed to do that through their IRP. It's lacking, big time. They need to have a better plan of what they're going to do, how they're going to do it, when they're going to accomplish it, what their timeline is, what the cost is going to be, and they need to know that they're looking at 5 people that are going to hold their feet to the fire, and they're going to say, get a plan, make a plan, work a plan, and bring it to us, and we'll let you know how we feel about it. And if it's not good enough, we need to question it. We don't need to say, well, I'll listen to it and I'll vote for it, and we'll just see what happens. We don't do that. We plan very carefully and we move forward.
And your time is up. And we're going to move on to the next question. Unlike incumbents, this is another audience question. Unlike incumbents, do the candidates get their residential bills from Georgia Power? We'll start where you left off. Lee Munns.
Yes, sir. I get my residential bill from Georgia Power, and I had 11% increase on my budget billing last month, and I'm not happy about it.
Keisha Waits.
The question is where I get my power.
I'll read this audience question again. Unlike incumbents, do the candidates get their residential bills from Georgia Power?
Yes, I'm a Georgia Power customer.
Okay, yep. Robert Jones.
Yes, I am. I'm a Georgia Power customer. I pay every month.
Peter Hubbard.
Yes, thankfully I'm not one of the almost 250,000 homes that were cut off from electricity last year, which is what Georgia Power does.
Daniel Blackman.
Yes, I am.
Okay, we'll move on to the next question. What will you do to confront Georgia Power and lower prices? Starting with Daniel Blackman.
What will we do to confront Georgia Power?
What will you do to confront Georgia Power and lower prices?
That's going to be a challenge for all of us. You know, I think as an individual, you know, the most optimistic answer we can give right now is that we get 2 public service commissioners elected this year, and we work the entirety of the state, and we start bringing people into the commission. I like the idea of making sure that we are engaging people in town hall settings outside of Metro Atlanta and going into communities. But the reality is we've got to go and stand up to the bully. I mean, I'll just say it, you know, publicly. If we're not standing up during these hearings, we can't just write memos and press releases and campaign on things. When we get this position, we've got to make sure that we're looking Georgia Power's attorneys in the face, and we're looking Georgia Power's representatives, and we're talking to them specifically about the burden that Georgians have. And I believe that's something we've been doing for the past decade. I'll continue to do it, but more than anything else, we have to make sure that when we see something that's unfair, we're speaking for the folks that can't make it to these meetings.
Peter Hubbard.
We'll be down at the Public Service Commission tomorrow directly confronting Georgia Power Company on their plan with an alternative plan that I put together on my website. So that's how I intend to do it. And then if I'm so lucky to be elected as a commissioner, I will directly fight to lower rates, not just lock them in at the high increase that we've just seen over the next 2 years. So again, I'll use that constitutional authority, which is not being used now, to push back against the monopoly power provider and lower prices.
Robert Jones.
Georgia Power has gone on record twice in the last 6 months saying they wanted to put downward pressure on rates. Sorry, I have it in quotes, okay? The fact that they canceled the rate case last week is a huge miss in terms of going in to scrutinize the cost and seeing, in fact, are the residential costs exactly where they should be, or are we seeing cost creep come in from these other areas? I'm more concerned now about upward pressure on prices and trying to prevent that, given the fact that we're not going to have a rate case because of that announcement they made. And so our opportunity to actually take them lower has been forfeited by the governor's announcement to say we're going to freeze rates for 3 years.
And Keisha Waits.
Thank you so much. So I think the first thing we should discuss is an ethics policy, putting something in place. As a member of the Georgia House, you're not allowed to raise money during the legislative session, and I think that that's necessary to keep us all honest. And so I support something like that for members of the PSC to prohibit them from taking any funding from any organization and or business that they regulate. So that's the first thing. The second thing I think we need to do is put in place a tiered system that is for businesses included, for seniors and vulnerable communities who are having challenges with making payments. It's my understanding that Georgia Power should have an $11.9 million cap as it relates to profits. And so I think that we tied that to a performance-based metrics to ensure that they are performing at the level to receive those profits.
And Lee Munns.
You know, I've had a lot of elected officials that I've talked to, and the thing you'll find out is Georgia Power is very entrenched in the political process, and their influence is money. I'm all for you remove, as a regulated monopoly, you remove their ability to give campaign contributions. Take it off the table. You take it off the table, and then you bring everybody to the same playing field to have the conversation. That's a Republican that just told you to take away campaign contributions. But it's the right thing to do, because for over the years, that has been an influential thing that has made people do the different things that they do. And so therefore, instead of having an ethics policy, you just remove the monetary influence, and then you can make the right decisions.
And we'll move on to the next question. This one is a virtual question from somebody online. Would any of the candidates support transitioning Georgia Power into a nonprofit or public entity that would remove the profit incentives from exploiting the public? Should I repeat that? Okay. Would any of the candidates support transitioning Georgia Power into a nonprofit or public entity that would remove the profit incentives from exploiting the public? And we'll begin with Lee Munns.
No, as a publicly traded company, and unless you're going to change to having a new power producer, you cannot remove their ability to have a profit, but you can control it. You can keep it from getting out of hand. So unless you're going to provide some other way to do that. Now, as some of the other folks have said here tonight, I'm all for now. There are private equity companies that want to come in and start building power plants and selling to the market. That's one of the biggest cost factors for Georgia Power customers, has been the building of power plants. Vogtle 1 and 2, Vogtle 3 and 4, both ran over budget. And if you had a private company, Oglethorpe Power is getting ready to build a plant, they've got a contractor coming in, it's private, it's money that they're going to do, and then they're going to go in there and get it done in a timely process at a fixed price.
Keisha Waits.
Thank you so much. From my time in the General Assembly, I recall that Georgia Power was probably the largest campaign donor to many of the, well, specifically those in leadership. So that's one. But I think that the best solution to this problem is competition. Many of us utilize Verizon, some of us are with T-Mobile, and I think that at the end of the day, I think we need to go back and revisit the idea of deregulation. It certainly did not serve Georgia. And I would be very interested in having that conversation with the General Assembly. Unfortunately, we just don't have the geopolitical makeup to make that happen at this time. Thank you.
Robert Jones.
So if you woke up tomorrow and all 5 of us were your new public service commissioners, we'd still have a hard time of regulating the monopoly. The monopoly has the advantage They have deeper expertise in the industry. They have more ways to move the cost around. We would certainly be a lot better off than we are today, but regulation in and of itself has limits. I know that from experience. To really move it to the next level of really having a highly efficient for-profit utility, you got to start introducing areas of competition and start chipping away at the monopoly aspects of it.
And that would be Peter Hubbard, who's next.
It is a good question. I'm wary of sort of completely remaking the whole model of what we have right now. And, there's a public power agency, the Tennessee Valley Authority, and they're building a lot of fossil gas plants. So, even that sort of model doesn't always work well. I do like the idea of performance-based rate making, sort of shifting some of the incentives of the monopoly utility towards ways that they can make money without selling more electrons. I absolutely agree with injecting more competition. There is just very little competition at all in the state. And so I just think that there are ways to improve. I think that competition with sufficient regulation is a model that does work. It just doesn't work here in Georgia because we don't have the accountability and we have a monopoly that runs roughshod.
Daniel Blackman.
I said earlier, I believe in performance-based metrics. Competition matters. I don't know that a model and changing it to a nonprofit would absolutely work in the state of Georgia. It's obviously great for us to look at considerations. However, I think that we need to be focused on the issue at hand, which is the metrics, the performance, and how they're going to operate long-term that has the best interest of the ratepayer.
And thank you so much. We're going to move on to the next question, and we're going to start in the reverse order. We're going to start with Daniel Blackman, since we ended with you. The question from the audience is, given that the Southern Company has no interest in a rapid shift to fossil fuels, in spite of the need for survival, how will you move us in that direction, given that Georgia Power? I'll repeat the question. Given that Georgia Power has no interest in a rapid shift to fossil fuels, in spite of the need for survival, how will you move us in that direction? And we'll start with Daniel Blackman.
So I mentioned this at one of the last forums where my father was United States Army Ranger, and one of the things my dad used to always talk about was going above and beyond the call of service. And I truly believe the only way to be an efficient and effective public service commissioner is to not limit yourself to the scope of work at the Public Service Commission. We've got to get up out of those offices and we've got to walk across the street to the state legislature. We've got to go around the state and we've got to advocate for it. We've got to educate county commissioners. I mean, these are areas that are not necessarily regulated by the Public Service Commission, but if we're going to truly find new ways to make new investment, we need to make sure that we're educating the folks that are in the best position. There was a great example this year of what certain Republicans want to do by introducing a bill that actually capped the ability for profits from data centers. We need to find legislation and policy that works, and we need to do everything in our power, once elected, to get behind good legislation that's in the best interest of all of us.
Peter Hubbard.
Could you repeat the question?
Yeah, it's a bit of a difficult question, but I'll repeat this. Given that the Southern Company, given that Georgia Power has no interest in a rapid shift to fossil fuels, in spite of the need for survival, how will you move us in that direction?
That is a great question. Yeah, what you should know is that Southern Company also has not just Georgia Power Company that they fully own, but they also have 3 other companies that they own, 100% for 2 of them, 50% for the other. Pipelines, natural gas pipelines, Southern Natural Gas Pipeline. They also own a couple of other natural gas companies. They have a strong incentive to keep pushing natural gas, and that's why they do it. Now, what I also know from my experience, 15 years in the energy industry, is that solar and storage are eating the lunch of gas. The only reason why they're not doing it here is because of the regulators and the monopoly power companies. So I happen to know that the economics work out very favorable for solar and storage and wind and not in the favor of fossil gas. So my approach is to just build more solar and push that fossil out of the system.
Robert Jones.
I want to believe the executives at the Southern Company and at Georgia Power in their heart really want us to move us to a clean energy environment. I don't think anybody wants to perpetuate really fossil fuel burning. I look at it as more of, this is what they know, this is what they've done, and it's a whole new paradigm, a whole new thought process I think they're struggling with to see a future that basically is based on clean energy. And so we have to help them get there. But we have made some progress. We have been closing some coal-fired plants in Georgia. We're not going fast enough. But in fact, I have to believe that the executives there would like to celebrate the day when we are a clean energy state. But right now, they're only using the playbook they've worked on in the past that have gotten the profits they need, and that's where we need to help them really expand their thinking.
Keisha Waits.
Thank you. I think that we changed that narrative through these types of conversations tonight. I believe that this election will serve notice to the PSC and to others throughout the state of Georgia that Georgians are ready to move in a different direction. Many of you all remember the biolab fire that happened in Rockdale and Conyers, so it speaks to the need for accountability. The reason that I think we don't see Southern Company making those moves is because they have simply never had to. And I think to Mr. Munn's point is that we have to have a PSC that mandates and that holds these individuals accountable. As it relates to coal renewables, I think we restructure them through short, mid, and long-term goals. This is not something we're going to fix overnight, but certainly moving toward solar, moving toward wind is the answer.
Lee Munns.
What they allowed to happen at Plant Vogel, bringing that plant in 7 years late and trying to do everything they could to try to just hang on and deal through that and ultimately pass it on to y'all, put us 7 years behind. And now what they're trying to do with the coal and everything is make it where they can meet the demand. And I get it for right now. But we need to have a strategic plan moving forward because I follow plant construction all over the United States. How did the Chinese build 4 Plant Vogels in less time than what we built here? How did the South Koreans go to Saudi Arabia and build 4 nuclear power plants in less time than what we built here? Yes, gas is going to be the short term, but we need to start thinking about the long term as well. What are we going to do to continue to work to make sure our environment is safe? I've worked on coal-fired plants when they shut down the fly ash ponds. It's not a pretty sight, folks. I can tell you right now, I do not want to go back to coal.
Thank you so much. We're going to go to another virtual question, a question from somebody in our online audience. You all have been constructively critical of the current Public Service Commission. If elected, how will you enable change with your term? Please share specific steps you will take to enact change you speak about. Starting where we left off with Lee Munns.
One of the things I'll do is the same thing I did when I served on the Georgia Professional Standards Commission. I served with deans of colleges, I've served with professors, I've served with superintendents, high-level, highly educated people. I came in there as a pipe fitter welder, but I started watching these people, and I started watching them, and I started listening, and I started seeing what was going on, and then I started connecting with them, and I said, hey, have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? I want to collaborate with people because it is a commission, but what you have to do first is sit down and get to know them, share with them your things that you know, and then let you hear their opinion, but then realize the status quo is not going to stay. So you and I need to come together and figure out how we're going to move this thing forward.
Keisha Waits.
Thank you. The conversation ultimately is about politics. Sometimes our colleagues need political cover to make difficult decisions. And during my tenure on the Georgia General Assembly, I had the privilege of working with members from all across the state. Many of us agreed on a number of things. I had Democrats that came to me from the southern parts of Georgia that said, hey, Keisha, I can't vote against a gun bill. I got that. So understanding the politics, I think, is going to be critically important. But at the end of the day, Georgia's changing. Our needs are changing. I've said it before. I'm not anti-business. I'm not anti-tech. But clearly, we've got to make some different decisions and move in the other direction. The rate increases, I think, speak to that. The fact that we've incentivized data centers speak to that. The 40% below national average speak to that. I'm not an expert on energy policy, but I know something about advocating for Georgia working families, and I think part of it's sunlight, letting people know that the PSC should be in place to work for each and every one of us. And that's ultimately how we'll drive down the costs that we have right now.
Robert Jones.
Can you repeat the question, please?
Yes, virtual question from somebody online. You all have been constructively critical of the current Public Service Commission. If elected, how will you enable change with your term? Please share specific steps you will take to enact the change you speak about.
I think the first conversation is a backroom conversation with the commissioners around the fact of, do you understand how you're perceived, how the public views this institution? Basically, you don't get very high marks. A big part of it is because you're taking campaign contributions from the affiliate companies of the Southern Company, okay? That means you're compromised. And once you're compromised, it's pretty hard to come back from that. So let's, as a commission, really think about the fact that Title 21 in the Georgia Code allows you to receive campaign contributions. Just because it's right doesn't mean just because it's legal doesn't mean it's right. And where's your conscience at night when you put your head down on the pillow and you've accepted money that basically that is disadvantaging the public? Where is your head at in terms of your ethics and moral? We shouldn't have laws. It should be your own conscience to say, we're not going to do that anymore.
Peter Hubbard.
So I recognize that I have to work across the aisle. If I'm elected, there will either be 3 or 4 other Republican commissioners, and I'll have to work with them and convince them that I have, that there are better plans than the one that Georgia Power is putting forward, the one that they're very reactive to. But I won't be afraid to also, point out where their thinking is flawed, or if they're not approaching something in the right way in the interests of the customer, of Georgia ratepayers. And so, I also know that you have to work with the legislature. If we want to have performance-based rate making, we have to have more institutional, systemic change. And I also want to, bring this campaign out to the people and empower them with the agency to go to the commission and their legislature and ask for the change that they also want to see as well.
Daniel Blackman.
So this is something I have worked on for the past 4 years, especially in the federal I was over 8 states in the United States. 6 of the 8 states were all run by Republican governors and Republican agricultural commissioners. One story I'll give for the sake of time is when Gary Black was the agricultural commissioner in the state of Georgia, we had 2 rules that came out of EPA. One was around PFAS, which is forever chemicals, and the other one was around dicamba, which was around chemicals sprayed on crops throughout the agricultural process. It took me about 6 months of back and forth with Gary, but after that process, we were able to work and coordinate across the board on what that meant long-term for Georgians. I don't know the commissioners to want to move back on the money and the amounts of resource they've gotten from utility companies. What I know is that relationships matter, and I think that over time, we do have to communicate with them, but we have to be very aggressive about moving forward about what we know that works, and more than anything else, we need to make sure we set that standard and raise the bar while we're serving in that capacity.
And we're going to move on to the final audience virtual question, the final question from one of our online audience members. And it goes as, why is Georgia Power getting a higher rate of return on their investments than allowed by the Public Utility Commission in other states? I'll repeat the question. Why is Georgia Power getting a higher rate of return on their investments than allowed by the Public Utility Commissions in other states? Starting with Daniel Blackman.
To my knowledge, that's a legislative issue. It was voted on that would allow Georgia Power to receive between 11 to 14% of a rate of a return on their investment. Look, nationally, the average is somewhere between 8 and 12%. So there are right there. I think what we need to really be concerned about is them, again, same thing you've heard for the majority of this evening, is performance-based metrics. They should not be able to get an exorbitant amount of a return on a project that not only has failed, but that ratepayers will be paying for the next 50 to 60 years.
Peter Hubbard.
Yeah, I'm sorry, just one last time the question.
Yes, why is Georgia Power getting a higher rate of return on their investments than allowed by the Public Utility Commission in other states?
Yeah, thank you. Other utilities, the market rate for electric utilities, natural gas utilities is around 9.5% right now. Georgia Power can earn up to 11.9% on everything in their rate base, and that can go higher. So it really just comes down to the commissioners and what they decide to set in that stipulation agreement that came out last Monday. Again, there was a $300 million slush fund so that they could raise the floor of their return on equity from 9.5 to 10.5%. So it's up to the commissioners. We just don't have commissioners that believe in accountability.
Robert Jones.
Yeah, the first time I went to the commission and spoke to them was in 2022 when they were deciding the rate of return that's currently in place there. I basically made the case of, look, if you grant Georgia Power what they're asking for, I'm not a shareholder today, but I probably should become one. Bubba McDonald agreed with me. He was the only one who basically voted against the rate of return that was set. The other 4 commissioners went for it. The way the process works right now is utilities benchmark other utilities. And so now that Georgia Power is set up high, others are going to benchmark Georgia Power, and those commissions are going to bring them up, And then when they get benchmarked, Georgia Power is going to get a higher return. So once you understand how the game is played, you start moving in a different direction. But right now, Georgia Power's rate of return is inconsistent with the risk that it's taking on in the marketplace.
Keisha Waits.
Thank you, Chris. By the time you get to me, I can't remember what I was going to say.
Neither can I, so should I repeat the question for you? Okay.
But at the end of the day, I think you have to follow the money. Georgia Power is one of the most generous donors for statewide, gubernatorial, any leadership race in the state of Georgia. Simply follow the money. And I think at the end of the day, that's one of the reasons that Georgia Power remains a monopoly. And so these conversations, I think, go a long way in terms of changing that dynamic. The recent freeze that you see in terms of Georgia Power rates happened because of these conversations. And so I think today that we need to keep these conversations going. I certainly like the idea of competition, and I think that we can hold them accountable with this upcoming election and with the decisions that we make in terms of who we choose as our representation. Thank you.
Lee Munns.
The other day, I had a lady call me. She's a CPA, and she said, "Lee, I own Southern Company stock, but it's getting to be a little too much. They're making a little too much. We need to check this up a little bit." And this is a lady who's an accountant, but she says, you know, sometimes we get a little too far down the line, and we need to start checking things up. So one of the things I want to do first is, how do you reduce cost? You look at your cost. What is your cost of delivery? How can you trim things? Okay, let's start looking at that first. And we've seen a lot of that going on throughout governments here lately, looking at how wasteful spending is going on. So, okay, let's go into Georgia Power, let's look at your cost, and let's see how we can reduce cost. And then after we do that, then we'll talk about the rate of return.
Thank you. That wraps it up for the question and answer session. We'll now move on to closing statements. You'll have 1 minute for your closing statement, and candidates, you'll respond in this order. We'll start with Lee Munn, since we ended with you.
Folks, I want to thank y'all for allowing me to be here this evening. I know I'm the only Republican up here, but I believe in collaboration. And one of the things of what we're dealing with here is something that everybody wants: low, cost-effective, reliable electricity. And in order to do that, it doesn't matter what side of the aisle you come from, it's about how we're going to get there. And it's looking at the process of where we're at and setting a vision of where we're going to go. My concern is right now, the commissioner that I'm running against, I don't see any vision. I just see his head constantly nodding. Yes, I'll give you that. Yes, I'll give you that. Thank you for my check. I appreciate that. You're not going to get that from Lee Munns. I'm an independent person. I'm an independent thinker. I collaborate with people to be successful.
Keisha Waits.
Thank you so much. I have a long history of working for Georgia families as well as the business community. I'm no stranger to working across the aisle as it related to public safety issues and things that burdened our state during those tough years. But I also believe that it's important that we talk about viability in November. This is a very important election, and I think that we have an opportunity to change the current climate. And I'd like to be a part of that conversation. And so I asked you to look at my voting record, look at my track record, and look at the fact that I'm no Johnny-come-lately. I've had decades of work here in the state of Georgia, at the federal, state, as well as the local levels. I am not an energy expert, but I am someone that, just like you, I work hard, and at the end of the day, I just want to get a fair return in terms of what my cost is, in terms of what I am paying. And so I look forward to serving and working on behalf of Georgia families, working on behalf of seniors, working with Republicans to get things done, and I have a track record of doing it, and I look forward to doing it in the near future. Thank you.
Robert Jones.
Early voting began today, so I appreciate you not casting your ballot until after this meeting. I entered this race to be of service to you. I looked at my background in terms of having been a former state regulatory commissioner, or working for a state regulatory commission, working for a monopoly and being an executive, looking at Microsoft. The experience and expertise I bring brings the moment and meets the moment right now. But it's going to come down to your vote. And you've got a tough choice to make here, okay? I think everything is a step up from that. I'm ready to serve on your behalf, apply my knowledge, and move things in the right direction. So thank you for the opportunity. Robert Jones, thank you.
Peter Hubbard.
Thank you all. My name once again is Peter Hubbard, and I really do appreciate your time and attention. And what I want to leave you with is just that I've invested a good deal of time and energy since 2019, 6 years, the full term of a commissioner, doing this work trying to fight for clean energy. I want to leave the world a better place for my 3-year-old daughter, my 9-year-old son. And I also just think that where Georgia goes, the rest of the Southeast goes. If we can crack this nut, we can make the dominoes fall for Alabama Power and some of these other monopolies out there. You know, there's a lot of people that need our help. I'm focused on Georgia, but I think we can have influence in other places as well. So thank you for your attention. Peter Hubbard.
Daniel Blackman.
I want to share the sentiment of everyone up here. Look, the Public Service Commission is one of those organizations that has not been talked about. The fact that we have a contested primary and we are sitting before 5 individuals that are vying for your support, it speaks volumes of how important this race is. The energy burden in Georgia has gotten unbearable. Families are struggling in rural Georgia and in coastal Georgia. I would ask you to just look at our backgrounds, look at our credentials, look at the work we've done, and take into consideration of what you've heard today. This is a very competitive group. We have, I'm sure, grown and learned from each other, but more importantly, we stand to serve the people of Georgia. I believe that what we are going to do today and what we are going to stand for going into the next few weeks is going to determine where Georgia goes as a state and where the South goes ultimately as it relates to energy investment and clean energy. I grew up with asthma. I understand the importance of clean air and clean water, and I've stood up for people around the state from Savannah to Brunswick to Juliet where coal ash has contaminated the water. Vote Daniel Blackman, June 17th. Thank you.
And I would like to, is that everybody? We cover everyone there? Okay, I think we did, thank you. And I'd like to close this portion of the forum by thanking all the candidates for their participation. And I'd especially like to thank the Atlanta Area Scouts for being gracious hosts. Tonight's sponsors are the League of Women Voters Georgia, Georgia Wand, the Cobb County Democracy Center, the Georgia State Conference of the NAACP, Atlanta Civic Circle, ACLU of Georgia, the Urban League of Atlanta, the People's Agenda, and the Partnership of Southern Equity. Now, to the voters, please remember, every registered Georgian can vote for the Public Service Commission, and this is the first day of early voting, as you know. Primary election day is on June 17th. Now, please check with your county voting registrar on the best instructions if you need to vote absentee. And that, I believe, is it. Do we have any more? That's a wrap. That's a wrap. Thank you very much. Have a good night. Yes.
You got a camera you want to bring?
No worries.
Just so everybody knows, there's food back there if you want to take some food with you.